I just came back from Asia. I went early December and spent some time out there. It's a little bit easier to travel when I'm based out of Asia, within the Asia region. I come from the eastern part of Canada. Flying out to Asia is very taxing. It's very difficult. It's very long. The flights are very lengthy, and then it makes it very difficult to move around. Whereas if I'm based there, then it makes it much easier. I like to do at least once per year when I do that. It gives me a completely different perspective, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. So less so about what I did and who I met, but the people on this call and the people within this time zone are, and or similar time zones, are very fortunate because you guys get to see everything in real time. In a way, it's this concept of synchronous versus asynchronous communication, and how essentially the people typically that are in the Western world speak English. You might be in Europe and such, but still a very similar time zone. So regardless of the culture, regardless of the language, this idea that you're in a synchronous period or synchronous communication with what's going on, especially with the ENF, or with block producers and the chats, Telegram and such, the majority is happening in a Western time zone in general. And how there's a lot of people out there, regardless of the language, regardless of the culture, they get asynchronously the communication that occurs. And so it's flipping that over. And so when I head out to Asia, what happens is now I'm in a synchronous communication with South Korea and China would be the two largest markets. And then you guys here in this call now become asynchronous. And so when I wake up in the morning, I'm catching up on, especially lately, 800 messages, 1,000 messages, or whatever it is. And that's how half of the community, and I'm just using half lightly, but just the other people that are not in these time zones are interacting with the community. They're getting it after the fact. And so they communicate synchronously within their time zone, but they can communicate asynchronously with, for example, us on this call, with the ENF in general, etc. And so it gives a very different perspective. Instead of being able to participate in a conversation in real time, you always get it after the fact. And once you do that for a period of time, so I was gone for 5 weeks, it really changes how the ecosystem looks, or how it's perceived, or how it feels. Because if you're just doing it for a few days, you can catch up, whatever, you can change your sleeping patterns in order to be a little bit more synchronous. But otherwise, a lot of the decisions that are being made day to day right now with the ENF are being done in a Western time zone. And so everybody's getting it after the fact. And how that impacts how you perceive EOS, how that impacts how the movement of the chain, whether it's the BP calls, whether it's these fireside chats, whatever it may be, the ENF translates everything. It's still done asynchronously. You're not getting it at the same time. And so getting that perspective changes things very much, and it highlights some gaps in the processes that we have, and or it highlights areas for opportunity to be able to close those gaps. And so that's always interesting. That's always really good. It's just very different. Like, I can't explain it other than you're a second class citizen, regardless of the culture and the language. And so being able to be in that time zone for a period of time, then being able to have synchronous conversations with people within those respective time zones outside of the edge hours. So obviously I have calls in the morning and at night with Asia, but being able to do it during the day, or being able to do it 2 p.m. or 4 p.m, which that is very rare in general, and not being able to do it with the other side of the world. So one of the things that we did early on is we started talking about this idea, and this came about the month of November and such, before me heading out, to increase communication, especially with the block producers. And so we started, we had our first block producer call, or I guess ENF-led block producer call, that we'll be doing on a monthly basis. Basically, top 30 block producers are invited to join on a call. All the information is open public, so they can all share afterwards. A lot of the conversations that we're having are conversations that we're having, for example, on this fireside, that type of thing, but having within a time that's a little bit more suitable for block producers that are out east, and doing it on a monthly basis. And so we had our first block producer call 2 weeks ago. We'll be having these monthly. We had about 17, 18 maybe a little bit more than that. Block producers, I don't recall the final count. We had about 30 something people on the call. Block producers participate. It was our first one. We had an agenda. We hit on some items that we wanted to talk about. We gave an update on EVM, which you guys are going to get shortly. The communications team is working on that. We did an update on ENV, did an update on the roadmap that we're working on for 2023 alongside budgeting. And we gave an update as well on an MSIG. So there's a few block producers that brought up this idea last summer, and it's been resurging a little bit again. So we'll talk about it today with you guys. But essentially, there is going to be an MSIG that is going to be brought up for community discussion. Currently, the ENF seeks funding every couple of months, and it requires 15 out of 21 in order to reach consensus to allow for funding. But there's a potential, I shouldn't say attack vector there, but this idea that 7 could potentially either willingly or because of policy block the ongoing operations of the foundation. And it was brought up that that doesn't provide stability in terms of the network, in terms of externals, in terms of internals as well, in terms of our own budgeting, etc. And this idea of doing the reverse, whereby 15 out of 21 would approve the funding, and then that would now be automated. And now 15 out of 21 would be required in order to stop the funding. So basically flipping it around. Instead of having 7 out of 21 to block it, it's now 15 out of 21 to block it. And so that MSIG is going, I don't know when, but the block producer is going to be publishing that, and I guess bringing that forth in the next couple of weeks. So we've been exploring internally with different services for communication specifically. So when we have these calls, either with block producers or even on Twitter Spaces, anything where we have different people from different languages join on the call. Right now we're doing asynchronous translation. I don't think that's the right term, but this idea that somebody speaks and then pauses, so speaks for 30 seconds a minute, pauses, then the translator speaks for 30 seconds a minute, whatever translates. And it's this back and forth. So any subject that you do essentially takes double the time. And if you want to do 3 languages, then it takes triple the time and such. And so the comms team internally has been researching, and there are a few solutions out there, and we're going to be experimenting likely next month. So the BP call, the next one is slated for, I believe, early February, something like 8th or 9th or something like that. And we're going to be experimenting with this new service and seeing whether or not it works well and such. But this idea of simultaneous translation. So I'll be able to speak English, or whoever is going to be able to speak, and then the translators translating, the interpreters interpreting simultaneously. And so it cuts basically the discussion in half if you're only doing 2 languages, but we'll be able to do this with Mandarin and with Korean. And then it also provides the transcript, or provides the subtitling, etc., so that then you can make products out of that, or you can give a little bit better debrief afterwards, minutes of meetings, that type of stuff. And so we're going to be experimenting with that in the next meeting. And ideally, if this works really well, we'll be able to bring that to more of the initiatives and the projects that we do as the ENF, so that whenever we do anything, basically people will be able to think of tuning in a channel. If you want to listen in Chinese, you tune in channel number 2. You want to listen in Korean, channel number 3, in Spanish, channel number 4. But you can do it at the same time instead of afterwards. And so we'll be exploring with that. We talked about that. And that's pretty much it.